Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? That's the big question. The big question that the disciples are left asking after that harrowing experience that we just heard told. Most of them experienced as sailors. They've been through storms, but they've never seen anything quite like this. And all they can do is wonder, who is this Jesus who can calm a storm? Now, Jesus' disciples are not the only ones who are asking about him. Who is this Jesus who can heal the sick, cure leprosy and paralysis, drive out unclean spirits? It's kind of one variation after another of that same question. Many in Mark's gospel who encountered Jesus are asking it over and over and over again. Who is this Jesus? Now, I know all of us have heard these gospel miracle stories many times over, too. So are we asking the same questions? Are we also a little bit uncertain about how to interpret what really happened? I mean, if you think about it, tales about storms that are miraculously calm, casting out demons, and miracle cures, well, they don't really fit into our rationalist, scientific kind of perspective on the world and how and why things happen, do they? So, who then is this Jesus? Who is this Jesus who we read about in Mark's gospel today, and what do we do with this fantastical story of supernatural intervention into our own natural world? I think all of those miracles were actually kind of hard to swallow for the people who met Jesus too. But those disciples, they still followed him, and the crowds, they kept on returning because their attention had been caught. They kept seeing things that they just couldn't ignore because they had experienced something amazing and compelling. And once they had witnessed it, what they saw, they realized, was some form of reconciliation between people, between families, and between communities. They were watching lives being transformed right in front of their eyes through all of these healings and exorcisms that Jesus was carrying out. So maybe we can be like them. We can look to their experience and try to understand and recognize and maybe even accept the presence of the work of God through Christ in our lives today. Can we too witness these healings and transforming power of miracles that are taking place all around us and know who then is this Jesus who commands all of those storms that assail us? Well, let's look at the disciples and find out. See, this story we hear today, it is actually far from their first miraculous moment with Jesus. We would expect them by this point to have a pretty good sense of Jesus and his ministry. And you know what? They seem confused. What do you think? When they wake up Jesus, they are afraid for their lives. They don't have any sort of calm assurance that Jesus can deliver them from this terrible storm. But you know what? They did turn to him. They woke him up. So maybe they expected that he could do something. Or maybe they were just annoyed that he was sleeping through that storm and could just be that calm in the middle of all of that wind and noise and maybe it was a bit of both, actually. So why should they be so uncertain of what to expect from Jesus? By this point in Mark's gospel, the disciples, they've witnessed a lot. Many exorcisms and healings. including the healing of Simon's own mother-in-law. They've heard Jesus teaching with authority and claiming the right as the Son of Man to break the law and custom so that he could eat with sinners and heal on the Sabbath. They've even witnessed the unclean spirits that he confronts, declare him things like Holy One of God. Yet they're still uncertain how to interpret Jesus' actions when they witness them. The disciples may have seen a lot, but they still have a hard time swallowing it. God has gotten their attention, so they know who to cry out to. They know that God is somehow at work in the life and ministry of Jesus. They've seen him changing people's lives around him. Well, I think that we, like the disciples, don't always get it at first. See, we sometimes fail to see or understand that little hand of God in all of those little miracles that are part of our own lives, too. About 6 months or so after I had started living in Africa, I began to notice something. There were a lot of funerals for women in their 20s and 30s. And as I started to attend them, I found out that they were all for women who had died in childbirth. Now, you see, as a young adult who had pretty much lived my entire life in the developed world, I just never had really thought that childbirth could still be so dangerous as in the closing years of the 20th century. And it just never thought there could be places where a normal, healthy birth is still, well, something of a miracle. Later on, in my 30s, I worked as a chaplain for a high-risk pregnancy, labor, and delivery ward. And there I daily sat and talked and prayed with women with severe complications of pregnancy. There were women who wouldn't actually be alive had they been giving birth in Africa without modern medical technology. I experienced the miracles of modern medicine I had all my life. But it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I was able to connect something that was so outside of my daily experience with something that had been sitting right there in front of me my whole life. It wasn't until then that I really got it. I understood what a great gift God has given us with the hands of our doctors, the minds of our scientists. It's a miracle. I wonder how many of God's daily miracles I either just kind of completely overlook or misunderstand, only feeling, this vague sense of awe, or maybe even confusion. I fail entirely to perceive the identity of the miracle worker behind it. What kind of miracles do all of us miss over and over again when they're right in front of our faces? I mean, think of all that criticism that it was taking too long to develop vaccines to fight COVID. I remember hearing it in the news all the time. Yet, a quick Googling will tell us that the fastest vaccine up until this point, the mumps vaccine, actually took 4 years to develop. So you know what? Looking back in hindsight, when we recognized it was just under a year to start putting COVID vaccine shots into people's arms, I mean, that's amazing. And I am sure that I am not the only one of us who thanks God for that miracle every time I'm able to step out my front door without fear of contracting a deadly virus. Maybe that's actually the point of all of these miracle stories. It takes something like that, something really big and really miraculous, to catch our human attention. It has to be something that is so outside our daily experience that we will actually stop. And we'll stop looking for human explanations, and we'll start to realize that it's not just we humans who are doing it all. In fact, we can't do it all. But you know what? When God gets our attention, and we have one of those moments when we really are witnessing that miracle, sometimes it can be frightening, it can be amazing, and it just fills us with this sense of understanding. The kind of understanding that really is that true awe in God's presence at work all around us. We're not that different from the disciples. These miracles, they catch us in the midst of our moments of greatest fear, when we're facing something just as huge as a terrifying storm or a giant. Now, King Saul and his armies, they were no strangers to miracles. By this point, God had intervened many times before, overwhelming their foes. Yet here they are. They are terrified of that giant Philistine who dares them to resolve the standoff between these two opposing forces by the right of solitary combat. Now, Saul's men, they're seasoned soldiers, and not one of them will step forward to fight Goliath. I mean, can you believe them? There is just this unbelievable cinematic level of hyperbole going on as we hear about the weight of the shining bronze armor being extolled. And we hear about those huge, impressive armory of weapons, one after another, being cataloged. Yet, here is this little whelp of a shepherd kid named David. He's too small even to suit up as a soldier. And yet he's the one who volunteers to face this giant, and it takes him down with a single well-aimed stone. This is one of the most memorable miracles in the entirety of the Old Testament. I mean, we all, I don't know, you read it in your children's Bible, right? We heard it in Sunday school. I mean, people who have never even read the Bible know about David and Goliath. It's thought about as this story that is the iconic image of the victorious underdog. Some today would say that it's no miracle. It's only superior technology and skill of the slingshot that David wielded. I watched a great TED Talk from Malcolm Gladwell. You've probably heard of him. He wrote Tipping Point. He's pretty well known. But he has a great TED Talk that's all about this. In that, he argues that in ancient warfare, a skilled slingshotter, they could hurl a rock at the speed greater than a .45 caliber handgun. And they would have the kind of aim and precision that could take down a bird in flight. Now, all of that may be true, but I think this rather misses the point, actually. The miracle was that David showed up at the right moment with enough trust in God and enough insight into the talents that God had given him. He was able to see past all of that might stuff that had every last one of those soldiers trembling in their bronze chainmail. Yeah, I buy it that David knew exactly what he was doing. But he was also the one that had the sort of relationship with God that he was able to see God's handiwork every time he survived a lion or a bear and met them on the mountainside. And you know what else? David, he could have just kept quiet. No one expected anything out of him. So, why not just drop off the food that he's delivering to his brothers and head right back to his mountain and his sheep and his nice, cozy relationship with God? It probably felt safe too. It felt wonderful for those disciples to just stay with Jesus on that boat after the winds and the waves had been calm. When we find those kinds of places or a people or the community where we meet God, it's natural to want to just remain in that kind of intimate, singular sort of spiritual experience. But just like David knew that he needed to face Goliath out on that field, Jesus has already begun to ask, his own disciples by this point in Mark's gospel to witness to all of the things that they have been experiencing, to witness to others. When we realize who Jesus really is, when we recognize that miraculous power of God's reconciling and healing love come out into the world in him, well, we can't just keep it to ourselves. I mean, just imagine if the founding St. Philip's folks, some of them are here today, just imagine if you had stayed hanging out in that city hall with the people that you knew great. It was fun, right? It was a good time, but it would have been also a lot less work having to build up the congregation, but you did it. You built up the congregation, you kept on witnessing to the love of Christ, and eventually you got this property, you transformed this building into a church that houses a thriving congregation, witnessing in Scotts Valley to the miracles of God's love through our Every ministry. You know what? I think that all y'all understood what David got and what the disciples actually figured out. That when God has wrought miracles in our lives or in the lives of the community that we're a part of, how can we not bear witness to that reconciling work of God in Christ out there in our world? Now, I know that bearing witness, it's not always an easy path. I mean, we kind of heard about that a bit in that letter from Paul to the church in Corinth. There's many people out there, they would rather just as soon talk about the hows and weigh the facts rather than accept that some sort of miraculous transformation could have taken place right in front of their eyes. That's the thing that had Saul's soldiers paralyzed, even when God had delivered them in many a previous battle. And that's why it took miracle after miracle before the people in Mark's gospel could get past their fear and start to see God's hand at work in Jesus. The reconciling, healing work of Christ, it can be unsettling. It can challenge our sense of what we expect. It can even challenge things like our sense of what's safe or unsafe and good and evil and all that stuff. And sometimes people react with fear. Yet transformation does not stop. It doesn't stop with the person who's been changed by that miracle, because they cannot help but challenge others merely by being their new self. Their new self changes the people around them. That's why David had to argue King Saul into letting him face Goliath. That's how Jesus' little group of followers became this huge cloud of witnesses to God's love that is the Christian faith some 2 millennia later. I had a friend when I was young. She was from a family of 7 children, and she was the last one in the family, the baby. Can you imagine? Well, it was the kind of family culture, too, where they were just teasing each other all the time. I mean, there was just one put down after another, and your job in that family everywhere was just to find the right kind of comeback. That's what she had to do to be able to survive her birth order. As an adult, she met and married a man whose family culture didn't have any teasing in it. We're from one of those polite, almost sort of gentlemanly Texan families. Good Southern manners. So you know what happened? In this new family, where she no longer needed to always find that best comeback, she changed. She was transformed. Now, for a while, when she and her husband would gather with her family, it was kind of disruptive because she wouldn't actually respond when her siblings started to poke and jive, trying to get that reaction from her. But eventually, things changed when her presence was in the room. She, by merely being there as a different person, bringing her new kind of family in, changed the tenor of her own family of origins gathering. It was amazing, a miracle. You see, Miracles breed miracles. Transformation breeds transformation, and healing breeds healing. God must have known this because God chose to begin reconciling the world to himself by working through people. God chose to come as a person into our world to heal and reconcile and transform people. And God in Christ Jesus continues to work this very miracle in our world, in all of the people around us today. The point of all of these miracles is to let us know that reconciliation and transformation is waiting for each and every one of us. It's there to help us through our fear and our doubt, to get us to that place of understanding. And then to give us the strength to witness those miracles to others. So, who is this Jesus? He is the best miracle of all. The miracle of God's love for all of us at work in the world. Amen.